Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yay!
Thank you so much for joining us on this day before Halloween in our little queer comic shop. So we are so excited to have you and to talk more about your beautiful graphic novel.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for bearing with me as I'm all dressed up in my queer little outfit.
Yeah. We would love it if you wouldn't mind starting out by sort of introducing yourself, telling us a little bit more about yourself and your journey into comics.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Johanna Taylor. I am a animation student actually, or I graduated in animation, and that was where I kind of got started on my artistic journey. And I ended up not doing much animation after graduating, so jokes on me. But I found really a deep and abiding love for tabletop RPGs. And so I did a lot of illustration work for tabletop publications in the indie scene. And I really came to love creating my own characters. And one of the characters that came about my tabletop RPG phase was Dorian. And Dorian is the main character of the Ghost Keeper. So he was supposed to be a character for a Bloodborne RPG, believe it or not. He was a guy who talks to ghosts, and that game ended up not happening. But I loved comics and I loved reading. I loved drawing things that kind of had a sequential storytelling element to them. And that was something that kind of came from my background in animation. I loved making illustrations that told a story, but just the one illustration was not as satisfying. And I liked the idea of being able to kind of continue the story. And so I felt like comics was the happy medium between my roots in animation and me pivoting into illustration. And tabletop RPGs made me fall in love with storytelling as a medium, and especially with the collaboration of the medium. And so, yeah, I just kind of ended up pivoting and bouncing around a whole bunch of different parts of the animation industry and the illustration industry. And I kind of landed into comics by accident because I pitched the Ghost Keeper on Twitter. Uh, Rest in peace, Twitter, during an event. It was hashtag DVPit, which was a pitching event where the agents would go through the hashtag and they would go through pitches and they would go and see which ones they liked best and reach out to the people whose pitches they wanted to represent. And that was how I met my agent. And little did I know that that was one of the last years that they actually had that pitch event before it went defunct. So I get a lot of questions of like, oh, how did you do it? How can I replicate that? And it's like, well, the way I did it can't be replicated because nobody gets work from Twitter anymore, and the hashtag event that I participated in is no longer a thing. So it's kind of a weird roundabout way that I ended up getting into comics, but I've absolutely fallen in love with it, and I feel like I've found my calling in a way in terms of the medium that really speaks to me.
That's amazing. I think, yeah, one thing in getting to do these book clubs, these conversations, I feel like one thing we've learned about comics and graphic novels and sequential art is that everyone seems to get there differently, which is great. I feel like almost every person's like, my way might not be the typical way, and then every single answer is different, which I love that there really is no typical way. But yeah, yours is especially unique, which is very cool.
Right. It's hard because like people want to be able to create their own stories as well, and it's hard to recommend to them the best way to go about that. But at the same time, it kind of opens up the floor and kind of creates a environment of anything is possible, anything could get you there. But it does make for not an especially useful like starting point and like wayfinder for, hey, this is how you do it. It's more just like, hey, it could happen to you. It could just smack you in the face one day, you know?
And how did the pitch translate to this gorgeous graphic novel. Like, how much of what you pitched ended up in here? Were there any big changes?
Actually, yeah. So when I pitched this to my agent first, she, bless her heart, Laurel Simons is my agent, and she came back to me. She was like, "Okay, this is kind of a mess, but I get what you were trying to go for, what you were trying to say." And she really saw through my stark lack of experience in terms of writing. And she knew that I wanted to get across the themes that I wanted to get across in the book, and she helped me kind of work through it. And so most of what you see, I would say it's about 65% of what you have in the final book was part of the original pitch and was the original direction of the story, with like a couple of tweaks that happened. Like, for example, Brody's character was a product of revisions and tweaks. He was originally going to, so originally Connell and Brody were one character, and I split them into two because I wanted to have kind of Connell acting as a cautionary, like, this is where you could end up, and Brody acting as a constant of someone who can ground Dorian. His presence grounds him so that he can have a point that keeps him from going in the direction that Connell goes into. So there were a lot, and I think Prudence Greaves is, she was an interesting one because she had a stronger role in the story at first, and then I scaled way back during revisions, but then I realized I needed to put her back in a little bit more. And so, and that ended up making for a stronger story anyway, I think, because I feel like her resolution and her development that she goes through with Gavin really helped a lot. And so there were various elements of the story where it's like I pitched it in the original script, and then I was like, "Oh, that's too much. Oh, that's cringe. Oh, this isn't going to work." And then ended up taking it out only to put it back in because I realized, like, "Oh, cringe is good actually."
Yes.
So, yeah.
Actually, I thought that your world building is incredible, and we were talking about this. It's not something you usually see from a debut like this, where you were able to show so much with without having to really it never felt force fed or anything like that. It felt very natural, and you accomplished like this beautiful world with rules and things like that. And I'm glad that you kept Dr. Greaves in, because I felt like having her at the beginning and the end and seeing her growth, Dorian's growth, and how they collide and they each benefit each other at the end was like one of the most beautiful things. And I did not expect it. It was way better than anything I could have expected. So I'm so glad that you had that. And it got me in a good way. I love that. So yeah, I'm glad.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. That honestly really makes me feel better because I went through the book and I was worried that there were too many characters and too many storylines happening, and that was one of the early bits of feedback that I got. And so it took a lot of woodshedding and a lot of really trying to hone in, like, okay, what is this character's goal and how can I integrate it into the main character and what he's trying to accomplish. And originally, like, Prudence was going to be a little bit more of a villain, like kind of acting purposefully against Dorian in like a malicious way. And I actually, developmental editors are amazing. I recommend them to anyone who wants to write stories and create comics, because one of my developmental editors was like, Prudence needs to not be evil. She needs to just be working with what she already has, which is the hard-boiled logic of, this is not natural. We are people. We should come before ghosts. And I don't necessarily want to exterminate them, but we can't just let them run around, you know? So I'm glad to hear that that was an effective part of the story and that it resonated with you, because it ended up resonating with me the more that I kind of iterated on her and her story throughout the book.
And actually, I think it would have been easy and unfortunate if she had dipped into villainy. And I think what was so cool about her is that when you're seeing everything from Dorian's perspective, and finally she comes in with this thing that he sees as something very bad for ghosts, and then for everything to flip and you realize actually it's really good for Dorian and for ghosts for that matter. So to have that, to be reminded that it's not just one person's perspective, and then to get to kind of see it from her perspective even more at the end, and then for her to take his perspective and talk to her brother, I thought it was a nice little surprise, and it was really cool. I like that a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to include a lot of different communication techniques because a lot of what I reference in the story are elements of. Oh, Raven is saying hello. A lot of what I reference in the story comes from cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, and one of those techniques deals with different communication styles and using means where you can kind of get your thoughts out all in one as opposed to having an off the cuff conversation. Like writing letters or keeping a diary is very heavily favored because of its ability to just be all kind of in one neat little package, and you can look at it and you can reference it, and the person there's not it's not as easily misunderstood, and there's no interrupting, there's no hostility happening live on the scene. It's more just I'm reading through and able to digest what you're feeling and what you're trying to say, and I can sit with it for a while and not be quite as reactive. And I felt like that was really important for Prudence because she does a lot of reacting all throughout the story. And so for her to sit with something and to kind of train herself out of that impulse of, I got to solve this now, I got to do something, and just being able to sit with what she's given and think about the words that her brother writes to her was really important for me to portray.
You did have a lot of quite an amazing cast of characters. Was there one who was the most fun to write, or whose voice was sort of the loudest or clearest to you while you were writing?
So Dorian was definitely the easiest to write for me just because Dorian is basically me in a lot of ways, like the consummate caretaker, peacekeeper, wanting everybody to be okay, wanting everything to be fine and nobody be mad at me, please, type of a thing. And I felt like it was very cathartic to write Dorian. But also surprisingly, Connell was a lot of fun to write because I feel like there's this inner queer-coded villain just dying to monologue inside of me. And so there was just that opportunity to just kind of launch into this, like, again, like villain monologues, because Connell monologues a lot. And it was a really surprising moment because I wasn't going to have him talk so much. He was just going to be kind of grumpy and curmudgeonly and not really say a whole ton, but and have most of what he was dealing with told through Lucy. But the more I wrote him, the more I was just like kind of had or pipe organ music playing in the background of my head of just like descent into madness. Because originally Connell had a redemption arc, and I was like, no. No, sometimes people suck. Sometimes people are just evil. And so I decided just like, nah, let's just let him be. Let him be the villain. Let him be a terrible person, because sometimes people don't have redemption arcs. Sometimes people don't apologize and aren't, contrite and penitent when they wrong us, especially when they're alive. And then you don't really get to know whether or not they're penitent after they're passed, because we don't have the luxury of being able to see or talk to ghosts generally, unless you're one of those lucky few. But yeah, I think that surprised me the most. I liked that a lot.
Actually, I love you dabble in mythology, but you've really created your own mythology, which I love. And I was wondering, you touch on Sin Eaters, Banshees, which is Irish, the Morrigan, which is Celtic, and my exposure to, for example, the Morrigan, she's kind of like a scary avatar of death. Usually, she's pretty mean in most portrayals. What made you decide to choose her and choose to represent her as a pretty benevolent, or at least pretty neutral, kind of mostly good, comforting avatar for death? I was wondering what made you decide to choose that take on her.
Yeah, I mean, originally it was just gonna be the Grim Reaper, but I took a research trip to Scotland while I was working on the graphic novel, and a part of that research trip was just taking a picture of a bunch of Victorian buildings and pavement and cobblestone and alleyways and bookshops to try to kind of provide a library for myself and compile things that would help me do better with the art. And I think as a product of exposure in the theming and in the atmosphere of a Victorian, like, Scots-Irish coded town, I pivoted away from the Grim Reaper just because it felt like it was kind of it's been done, and I was looking into the Celtic gods and Celtic mythology, and my research of the Morrigan, I mean, first of all, I'm a huge fan of crows, in case that wasn't obvious. And so I already had those in the story, and Morrigan is all can sometimes be referred to as the Crow Mother, and she's actually a triple goddess, so she's the maiden mother crone archetype, and so I felt like there was a lot of potential there for her to be a neutral, sympathetic character because she plays a very multifaceted role in Celtic mythology. So, like, sometimes she's depicted as a goddess of war, sometimes she's a goddess of fortune, sometimes she's a goddess of, like, they will pray to her and, like, they want her input and they want her to weigh in on who's gonna win what battles, and a lot of times the outcome is a little on the fickle side, and so, like, she doesn't show partiality toward one side or another in conflicts, especially in, like, the Celtic myths where she is involved in war. And so I wanted to play into that and just kind of add a level of fickleness in her role as someone who exists outside of time, who can shepherd souls in to the afterlife. Because I thought that, she wouldn't, as in that role, she wouldn't be partial. It would kind of be like, yeah, if I find you, and you're really young and I feel like you shouldn't die so young, I will save you. And if I don't, then you don't. You just are in limbo and I'll do my best to save everybody that I can, but I'm not going to really beat myself up over it or create any sort of, like, weirdness or, like, present impartiality. It's more just kinda like, "Oh, I just happened to run into you again. Okay, out you go." But I felt like I wanted to touch on the mother archetype the most within that triad of her representations because, like, a mother would be concerned and sad about seeing a child die before their time and would want to go out of their way to help that child to get the most opportunity out of life or afterlife as they can. And so that was what tipped me into really portraying Morrigan as a sympathetic, as a very, like, protective and almost motherly figure, particularly to, Lucy near the end. So there were a lot of elements that went into it, and I was very surprised to see how many different, facets of the Morrigan existed because, man, Celtic mythology is just a complicated web of, "This god does this. No, actually, they do this. Just kidding, they do all of it, except when they don't." And so it was really fascinating to do that research because I kind of came to the conclusion that's like, if I latch onto one aspect of the Morrigan, it's not necessarily going to be inaccurate because she is all of those things. And at the end of the day, she existed as a presence used to explain why things happen, right? And she exists within a larger culture. And so I felt like it kind of ended up being a natural transition to use her as the stand-in for the Grim Reaper, but also injecting a little bit of her fickle nature and a little bit of her neutrality of just like she doesn't especially care about the outcome and she's not out to change any history or like uh really have an agenda behind what she does. It's more just she's a mother. She feels sympathy for certain souls of a certain age and will help when she can, but otherwise she just kind of is the one who goes in after the fact and like fishes people out of limbo and helps them get on their way, but they do have to do the work themselves of divesting from their rot and their regrets so that she can help them.
Thank you. Like I said, very cool mythology. I love that you used her, and your interpretation is awesome. So thank you.
Thank you.
Was there anything specific that led you to make the choice to have the rot kind of present as it does? I thought it was very cool. It's like so pretty, but also kind of scary, and obviously the ghosts hate it. I would too. But it was like kind of beautiful at the same time, like a flower all of a sudden in the eye, like again, scary but pretty. So I just guess what like decisions led you to want to present it in that way?
Yeah, so I had recently watched Nausicaa at that point when I was doing designs for the raw, and I'd seen it before, but there was something about the aesthetic of the fungal spores within that movie that really stuck with me, and that was something that I kind of subconsciously leached into what I was making with the character designs, and it ended up being very effective because especially when you think of cordyceps and the way that they behave, particularly on insect life, like you've all heard of like the zombie fungus and the zombie spores that kind of infect ants and it causes the ants to go and like spread it around. And I mean, fear and regret and anger and any sort of like negative emotion kind of has that effect where it's like negativity isn't necessarily contained in a vacuum. It can kind of spread to people around it and it can affect the people around it as well. And so I liked the idea of incorporating that and having that be the visual shorthand for how the ghosts' negativity, their loss of hope, and as a result, their loss of agency presented in kind of a fungal spore like representation. But at the same time, like, as we know, fungus isn't all negative. It's not just a thing that is viewed as bad and evil and sinister. It kind of erupts as over a natural course of the life cycle, and it kind of breaks down matter and so that new matter can be formed. And so I wanted to play into a little bit of that and kind of create a little bit of beauty in the rot just as it existed and a little bit of beauty in the bog of limbo as it just for what it was. But the point was to just it eats and feeds on negativity, and it is incumbent on you to shed your rot. And if you don't, then you kind of become controlled by it. And then you eventually will be broken down by the rot so that you kind of disappear into the ether and go on to build up the bog, as it were. And so the rot that you see in the bog, it's basically just eons and eons of ghosts who couldn't shed their rot. And that is the fate that kind of becomes of them.
Very cool. Thank you for that.
No problem.
You shared a little bit about your character designs. Was there a character that was the most fun to illustrate?
Um, yeah, I think Lucy was a lot of fun to illustrate because she was very expressive. She's definitely the most expressive character in the book, and that kind of made my little animator heart happy. But also, I had a lot of fun, drawing Lazarus just because she was kind of, like, bucking trends compared to the other characters. She was the character that kind of stood out as a little bit anachronistic and a little bit outside of time compared to the main cast, and so I had a lot of fun with designing her. She went through quite a few iterations because originally they were gonna have, like, oh, the ghost designs were so complicated at first. They were gonna have, like, an indication of how they died as part of their body, and so originally, like, one, Owen comes to mind, he was gonna have, like, an axe sticking out of his head, and Lazarus was originally back in earlier drafts, she had died from a fire, and so she was gonna have fire kind of licking at her dress, and it was like it was a cool idea in theory, but design-wise, it was an absolute nightmare because in comics, you have to draw that thousands and thousands of times, and it's like, "Oh gosh, no." It ended up being a little bit too much, but she was a lot of fun because she got to be a little bit more, dressy and flamboyant, and it was fun to kind of fit that in a panel and have it. I guess it was tricky to have her not steal every scene she was in, even though she kinda does anyway. But I would say, her and Lucy were my favorite just from expressiveness and from how much they differ from the regular decorum and the standard kind of trying to blend into their environment style of the other characters.
Nice, that's awesome.
I don't really have a question, but I really appreciated the like care that you put into giving each of the characters like a satisfying emotional arc. And you call Connell evil, but I feel like you lay enough groundwork to explain how he gets to that point, to the point that I didn't even really feel like it was like his own actions, it was him subsumed by the rot and grief that was really behaving. And I disagree that you didn't give him a redemption arc because you have the bog, and the Morrigan says that at some point every ghost will arise from the bog. So I did like that, but I also I loved that you had Catherine the mother save Lucy at the end from him, because I felt like she became the banshee out of fear for her daughter, and so to even give this like character that we only see in a backstory of somebody like a satisfying conclusion was quite lovely. So.
Oh, thank you very much. And I think I agree with you, honestly. Like, I guess he will have a redemption eventually. You don't get it in the story, which is like, that was more what I was referring to, of just like in life as he affected the main characters, he doesn't get redemption and he does suffer punishment. But it it is very clear how he got to that point, and that was really important to me to show how he got there and why he made the decisions that he made. Because if you really look into Connell's arc, it makes complete sense why he arrived at the conclusion that he arrived at. And some people would even be tempted, like, no, I totally get it. I would have done the same thing. And so that was really important to me. But also, that was an 11th hour edit to have Catherine in there to save Lucy. Like, that came to me as I was thumbnailing the very end of the book. And I was just like cry drawing through the last few pages because I was just like, oh, what if she saves her daughter? And I felt like she was kind of an underrated character just because she doesn't really show up a whole lot in the story. She just kind of is mostly referenced and talked about. And so it was nice to have a moment to really show who she actually is, and kind of the fact that it's like she's still a banshee, she's still being consumed by rot, but you can tell that she's working through it, and she's not looking quite as bad as she did, and you have hope that she will eventually make it out, because there is some part of her that still wants to protect her daughter, and that is a redeemable enough trait that that will help her to rise out of the bog eventually. But that was a very beautiful point. I really appreciate that insight.
In some ways, she haunts the narrative.
Exactly.
Also not a question more of a like comment slash compliment, but I loved the way that you wrote and handled Lucy's character overall. She very much hit home for me as a kid who both grew up thinking about their own mortality a lot and grew up like adjacent to the world of like childhood cancer and stuff. My like grandmother worked in social care for pediatric cancer. I saw and knew a lot of kids who died, and that feeling of like, why was I here at all? I thought was just handled very much emotionally hit home for me, and like I thought was handled very well, and I very much appreciate that she got a happy ending in the end, because I was rooting for I know Dorian's the main character. I am rooting the hardest for Lucy right now. I need her to have a happy ending, so I love that she got it.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much. And oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been, because like it's hard. I didn't feel like I could speak from too much firsthand experience about things like chronic illness or things like cancer, like you mentioned, but like it was really important for me to uh portray the sense of feeling like you reached a point of no return, and feeling like you can't go back to the way things were. And there's beauty in grieving that in whatever form that it takes. And it's especially hard for someone like Lucy, who felt like she never had agency in her life. And she felt like things were kind of perpetually happening at her. And so for her to finally pass on and be like, well, now I'm free. Now I can make my own choices, to discover that it's kind of too late in some ways. I really wanted to dip into that tragedy, because that's something that's like there are a lot of elements in there that come from my own upbringing of feeling like I didn't have a lot of agency in a lot of like the big picture decisions in my life. And I spent a lot of time in my youth being deathly afraid of mortality, and afraid of the concept of, what if this all comes to an end? What's going to happen to me? What if I make a mistake? What if I die and then I go to heaven or whatever, and God or whoever is there and passes judgment because, oh, you didn't do that thing, and what if this is all a waste? And so I would find myself getting into those thought loops that were really quite destructive. And so I felt like Lucy was sort of my way of revisiting that version of myself who was so afraid and wanted so badly to just do the things that I wanted to do without worrying so much and being under the thumb of something higher than me, and feeling like I didn't have agency to make my own decisions. And kind of telling that younger version of me, it's okay, like, and creating a narrative that provides comfort for people, because I know death can be a really scary thing. And depending on certain belief systems, death is the end. And that always terrified me as well growing up. And so I wanted to create a scenario in which it doesn't have to be quite as final and quite as high stakes as it's often thought about. And I felt like that was really important, especially for Lucy's arc, for her to finally take ownership of her actions and face consequences, but in a loving way, as opposed to just being so scared of facing punishment and so scared of what could be waiting for her, and having that scare her into, things like stalling and inaction and trying to divert and trying to see if she can foist the blame on somebody else. And So that was really important to me to kind of create a scenario in which the afterlife is not something to be feared. It's simply an extension of our life, and it is what we make of it. And it's up to us whether we have a good time or a bad time in the afterlife. And it comes down to shedding the fear and shedding the hopelessness that we might be carrying without knowing it.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
One other aspect as well of Lucy's character that I appreciated that I just want to mention is like her struggle with obviously her father, and like a scene towards the end that was really kind of impactful for me was when Dorian and Lucy tried to confront him again, and he was really, had really gone all the way to the other side of no longer thinking that, he would talk to Lucy at all or anything could be done there. And like Dorian standing up for Lucy and basically saying, what you're doing is wrong, you shouldn't be treating her like this, she doesn't deserve those things. Like, little kid in me who maybe didn't have that type of advocate was really like, oh, it's really sweet. So it was really impactful and beautiful as well.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I really wanted to have that in there because I wanted to kind of provide an advocate for Lucy, because that's what Dorian is supposed to represent, or in his mind that's what he's supposed to represent, is I am the advocate for these ghosts. And to have it do some good, and to have it do some to kind of prove that there is value in standing up for people who are gone and people who are dead. And sometimes that's not enough, but it was important to me to have that be the end point of Dorian and Lucy's relationship, so that Lucy could feel empowered to do the scary thing and be rewarded for doing the scary thing, because now she has an advocate who is actually interested in helping her. Beyond just treating her like a little kid, he actually views her as like, no, she's been wronged. She's not just some sickly little prop in your life that was a drain on your resources. She is a person, and she had desires, and she is capable of change and improvement and progress.
And your cast of characters is incredible. And what I will say though is that Dorian is still my favorite. I love all the characters, but not to forget to give him props. He really spoke to me as a character. I loved him. I loved getting the story through his lens, and then having it like having the foil of some of the people in his life to kind of bounce it back and get a sense of, he's clearly not always right, has his own issues, but he was such a good character. He really was a star for me in this. So thank you for giving us Dorian.
Thank you. I'm so glad you like him. Dorian has this very special place in my heart because he's one of those this is probably relatable, but I'm big into like OCs. And I've had the same OCs just kind of rattling around in my head, going through various iterations since like I was a kid. And Dorian is one of the oldest characters that I've had who's gone through several iterations. And so I'm glad that people have been resonating with him, and that you resonate, and that he resonated with you too, because he's just the picture of toxic positivity. And I feel like that's very cathartic and validating to see played out on the page. But also it's kind of a subversion of a chosen one, where it's just like he put the mantle on himself, and he believes that because he has an ability, he has to do something with it. And throughout the story, he's kind of proven wrong, of like, oh, actually, not really. You don't have, nobody is forcing you to do anything. It is your insecurity and your fear that is driving you forward. And yes, you are doing good, but it is important that you take care of yourself too, because if you don't, then what's the point? You need to be kind of as kind to yourself as you are to anyone else that you try to save.
Portrayal of the martyr complex in him is such a good draw to the character, and it's not something you usually see played out like this, where it is not something that's rewarded. Like, it is rewarded, but it's also not rewarded, and all the positives and negatives that come with it. I thought it was beautifully done, so thank you for that. It was great.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I have a comment, but I don't know if you can hear me from back here. Let me know if I need to go closer.
I can hear you. It's a little quiet, but I can hear you.
Send you a little bit.
So one thing that I really appreciated with Dorian and his storyline is I remember way back when hearing someone say, a boundary is the distance I can love you and me at the same time. And I feel like that is, like, this is like a visual representation of that quote, like towards the end, and especially with the Ghost Be Gone bags and stuff like that. So I really appreciated that, and like that arc at the end was the one that really hit home for me. So thank you for your visual representation of a quote that broke my brain 10 years ago.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yes, boundaries are a very good thing. And that's something that doesn't get enough praise. Well, I feel like it's getting a little bit more mainstream nowadays, but that was something that I really wanted to portray in the story as something that is important. The idea that setting a boundary is a neutral act, and it's something that you do for yourself. It's not something you enforce on other people. It's basically like it can be an act of self-care. And the fact that some people can react badly to your boundary, but that doesn't mean that the boundary is bad if it's what you need in order to be okay, right?
I love that there is actually like literally a very firm boundary, because like they can only come so close, but also just like a portrayal of someone genuinely setting a boundary, because like you just mentioned, it might be becoming more popular to set boundaries, but I feel like a lot of times there's kind of an unspoken expectation that it's a wiggleable boundary, or like you're still able to bend a certain amount if if it's reasonable to, or that kind of a thing.
Yes.
So I love that this was a real true boundary. Like, I'm doing this, I'm not doing this, and that's going to be how it works from now on.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing about boundaries is a lot of it comes down to you set it with people, and some people will kind of try to push against it, and it's really easy to kind of like, okay, well, just this once I'll drop it, or just this once I'll change it. And it's hard to be consistent with the boundary, but also people don't really recognize that boundaries aren't you controlling other people's behavior. They're just controlling what you allow. So like you set the boundary for you, you don't set the boundary for others. And a lot of people try to use boundaries as a means of, I'm going to control you and dictate what you can do. Whereas a boundary really just needs to be, this is what I will allow to happen to me. This is the limits I place on my energy and my space and my time. And once I hit that wall, I need to be the one to step back rather than trying to, like, impose the boundary on others and be like, I'm punishing you with X. It's more of I'm healing myself with X. I'm taking care of myself with X.
I really liked also how the discussion that they have about how by like always feeling the need to save and advocate for everyone, he's refusing them agency and their own abilities to try to like save themselves in certain ways. And I really liked how you demonstrated it between the relationship between Lucy and the grandmother, because I really like how in the beginning the grandmother is similar to most older people about children, being like just kind of manipulative, and she's refusing to do the thing that she has to do because she's being selfish, even though the grandmother's doing quite literally almost the exact same thing. And then them being able to talk to each other and like find healing and bonding, and her, I think, also finding sort of redemption about like her granddaughter who also passed away, that she really never got to connect with because of her relationship with her son. So I loved that. And then at the end, her holding hands with both her granddaughter and Lucy, that was quite lovely.
No, thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, that was one of my favorite developments in the story, was the relationship between Lucy and Granny Lazarus, was the fact that they started off just hating each other, and Lazarus was just kind of viewing Lucy as, you know, she's this insolent child. She doesn't get it. But also there's an element of jealousy there because Lazarus was searching for her own redemption and for her own way out of limbo, and she couldn't find it. And Lucy basically just walked right up to the door and but then ran away from it. And so it was nice to be able to explore that element of Lazarus feeling envious and using that envy to kind of lash out at Lucy and like doing a little bit of misdirected anger. And the relationship between Lazarus and Dorian was really interesting and cathartic for me to write because she focuses so much on like family needs to come first. Family needs to be the superseding thing that you prioritize in all elements of your life. And she uses that as a manipulation, and whether maliciously or not, that's something that really affects Dorian because he ends up feeling like, oh my gosh, I need to prioritize family. I'm a bad person if I don't. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to within their own experiences.
Sorry. I have another quick question. At what point did you know, sort of in the story development, at what point did you know that the key never comes back and that she was going to knock on the door?
That was also a very end of the story development. Like, I'm trying to remember what the original plan was. I think they were just going to they were going to stumble upon Morrigan outside of the door, like, they were gonna find her first, and there were versions of the story where the key was gonna be rebuilt or the key was gonna be reformed through this kind of a quest thing, but then it was getting to be a bit long. It was already 200 something pages, and I was like, "I this needs to end." But I think the knocking thing was something that just kind of occurred to me as I was thumbnailing the last few pages, and I just kind of really quickly squeezed it in. It wasn't in the script. I just kind of added that in as like a, "Hey, by the way, I'm changing this," because I felt like that element was really important to show that Lucy and any ghost that approach death's door, it like creates the agency of, "Hey, the key is kind of a MacGuffin. It's not that important that it was destroyed because, I mean, Morrigan can make another one. She's a god. The point is that you're approaching the door using your agency to take the key, turn it open, and open the door. And that is your demonstration that you are ready to move on." And having that kind of be stripped away from the ghosts creates that panic, but I feel like adding in the knocking was a little bit of my kind of, because I came from a Christian background, and that was very much like something that I had learned growing up, like, if you knock, if you pray, your prayers will be answered, but very much in a framing of you need to be proactive, not you can stand idly by and just kind of hope and dream and eventually things kind of work out. It was more from a framing of you have agency, you can affect change in your life, you take that step, and whatever deity is waiting for you on the other side will meet you halfway. And so that was kind of my version of reconciling that and communicating that in a little bit more of an agnostic universal way of like, hey, your effort matters, your action matters, and you need to take the steps to be able to be ready to move on from whatever is burdening you. And then the door will open for you because you made the choice to knock.
Yeah, I actually really loved that, especially that Lucy's the one who knocks.
I'm sure you know this in some versions of the Morgan myth, she's very much viewed as a god of like sovereignty, which I think coming from like Celtic myth makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But seeing that she is responding to this ask and this sort of act of, yes, I have a right to exist and belong, I thought was really beautiful, and I really, really loved at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, and it ended up kind of, like you mentioned, feeding into Morrigan's character because she is a character who perpetually responds. She is not a reactor in any way. And that was important to serve as a foil for the rest of the cast, where all they do is react. And that's something that's really important with the therapy angle, and something that I was learning actually. A lot of what made it into the book was taken directly from therapy sessions that I'd gone to. Therapy's good, kids. But the anecdote that Dorian tells Lucy about the wolf was actually something that I was told in therapy, where it's like, a wolf isn't inherently evil. A wolf is just a wolf. They have instincts, but they're not going to, there is no like definitive action that they are going to take against you. It's just that you see a wolf, you have a presupposition of what that wolf is going to do, and then the fear comes, whereas the wolf is just kind of sitting there hanging out, and it hasn't had a chance to hurt you yet, but because of your fear that it might, that causes you to react. And that is the way your emotions control you versus you controlling the situation and taking the time to respond versus react. And so that was really important to me to create that that dichotomy of this is how we create peace in our minds, to become people who respond and become people who weigh the consequences out in our minds, to think through our actions before we take them. And that's something that all of the characters in their own way have to learn as they go through the story.
I thought the whole book was beautiful. It's full of a lot of powerful moments and really happy moments. So I appreciated the inclusion of Muffin, the ghost cat. You know, like, as an animal lover, I have 4 cats. So every time Muffin was on the page, I'm like, oh, we have cats stealing the scene. But I appreciated how you used. I can't remember if it ever said Muffin's a boy or a girl cat, but you used her to.
Yeah, she's a girl cat.
She's a girl cat. Yeah, you used her to add some levity to some scenes where things aren't always so heavy, and also just really love the part where Lucy is kind of having a breakdown and Muffin comes up and just like, you know, loves on her and gets some love and just makes things feel a little better. And yeah, I just really like that part of the book.
I was also going to make sure Muffin got a
I
shout out, so
have
thank you
a
for
Muffin
that.
question that's a bit silly.
What?
I noticed that Muffin never had rot on her, and so I was wondering if the reason why she was hanging out is because she went to the door and like scratched out and begged, and then the Morgan opened it, and then she's like, "No, I don't want to." And then ran away.
Morrigan's not a cat person. Or Muffin just like, nah. I like that better.
When you like open the door after they bag and they're like, "Oh, I actually don't want to go in. I just don't like that the door was closed."
Yeah, like,
Oh my gosh. I actually really love that, and I kind of want that to be canon. So the original reason that Muffin didn't have rot on her is mostly because like there's not a whole lot of emotional processing that animals can do. Like, animals don't regret. They don't think of things they did and wish they had done things a different way. They don't really do that. And so that was more like one of the reasons for it. And plus, like, Muffin's just like a chill old lady. She's kind of grumpy, but she doesn't let that like affect her disposition. But the reason that she's still around in the living world is because she's Gavin's cat. So she goes where she mostly is hanging around because Gavin's hanging around, and and that's why Gavin knows her name. And so she just kind of pops in, pops out, but she also just kind of isn't strictly attached to Gavin. She just kind of goes where she wants and moseys around, and then she becomes really fond of Brody, becomes really fond of Lucy, and that kind of becomes a thing. But I honestly, I love that headcanon of she already went to Death's Door and then decided, nah, no, I'm good. I didn't actually want to open that door. Okay, bye. And Morgan's like, okay, bye, cat.
10th cat this year has done that.
Other than the fact that this beautiful book exists and that we get to hold it, which is absolutely no small feat, can I ask what you're most proud of from the book or the reception to it?
Oh gosh, just the fact that the book exists at all. I'm very proud of that because throughout my process of making a comic, I learned just how hard it is to get comics made. And over the process, I just kind of kept thinking like, "Oh my gosh, the fact that any comic exists in book form is frankly miraculous." And I really came to appreciate the hard work that goes into creating a book like this. But also, I was really proud of the reception of younger readers because I had a lot of people messaging me, coming up to me at conventions and telling me, "Hey, this is helping me talk with my parent about how I'm feeling," or parents will be like, "I this helped me to talk to my child about death and about, loss and about their fears of, the world being in the state that it's in." And it's created a lot of good opportunities for conversation, and it's created some good jumping off points for approaching the subject of therapy and approaching the subject of, hey, you have these thoughts, you have these preconceived notions in your head that create a chain reaction and dictate your actions and what you do. And that needs to be kind of examined and worked through. And you are a product of your experiences, which is okay. It's a totally neutral experience. It's just something that if you end up causing harm to yourself or to other people as a result, then that really needs to be examined. And it's doing yourself a kindness to really think about those things. And so I'm really proud of people who have who resonated with the therapy elements of it and the people who resonated with the relationship elements of it, because I essentially wrote the story that I wish I had seen when I was little, because there were a lot of elements there, like the ending, the portrayal of the afterlife that I'd mentioned earlier. There were a lot of things in there where it's like, if I had read something like this when I was a kid, it would have brought me great comfort. And especially with like portraying Dorian and Brody in a relationship where it's like their queerness is not what's causing them problems and causing them strife and sadness and trials in their lives. It comes from their dynamic as a relationship. And this could have been true of any type of couple. And they can exist as a queer couple, and that can just be the reality that they're living in, and they don't need to be bogged down by their queerness. It's more about them defining their relationship as people and as like, because Dorian's asexual and Brody is gay, and like that doesn't get really a ton of screen time on the page, but it's implied like Dorian's not necessarily looking for romantic overtures physically, and Brody being able to kind of meet Dorian at his level, and also dealing with the fact that one of them sees ghosts and one of them doesn't, and the very real strain that puts on their relationship. And so I think to make a long story short, I'm proud of the elements in there that I put in there that I wish I had seen when I was younger, and having people respond really well and be able to say, I that resonated with me. I am glad that this book exists. And that to me is the ultimate moment of pride that I feel is like, if even one person can read the book and just be like, I feel like I'm a better person having read this book, then that is the apotheosis of the I have arrived. I have made a good thing, and that is something that really has been really humbling and really wonderful to hear from people. And I am constantly in awe at people's insight and people's just outpouring of love and support, and the fact that they were able to resonate in the same way that I was able to resonate with the story.
Yeah, I mean, even as a group full of big kids, we clearly resonated with us as well. So we are all the better for it. So thank you for that.
I have a friend who runs a queer book club out of their library for like high school teens, and I've already recommended this to be added to the poll list for a future book club. So
Oh,
it
thank you.
resonates with everyone.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Honestly, I was so excited. I was so excited when you guys approached me, was like, hey, this is part of our book club. I was like, oh my gosh. Because like I love book clubs. I love being able to like talk comics and talk story with friends and stuff. And so like the idea that a group of people are reading and discussing my book, just like it delights me to no end. So thank you guys very much for being willing to read my silly little sad ghost book.
I also want to add that I was stunned when I learned this was a debut. I think it was really wonderful and beautiful, but also like so like dense in a best way possible. Like, you know, like a ton of story here and done really well. For it to have been your first graphic novel was like all the more impressive.
Oh, thank you so much. I definitely don't recommend having your debut graphic novel be nearly 300 pages long. But it ended up being really, really rewarding, and I've really enjoyed learning the comic process, and I've just spent the past couple of years absolutely devouring comic books and graphic novels, and it's been just some of my favorite ways to spend my time now is just see how other comic artists compose their panels and see all the different ways that they can create a feeling through very abstract means. And it's a lot of fun. I really like it, and I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it too.
I'm glad you found something you're so passionate about.
Yeah. Can you share some titles of things that you've been reading and enjoying?
Yes. So I actually have one right here. Oh, sorry, Raven. By the way, Shadow, the bookstore cat that belongs to Brody, was based on my little Raven kitty. She's normally invading various interviews that I go on. I think this is the first time she's been pretty chill and non-intrusive. Anyway, back to comics. So this one I got in the mail a few weeks ago. This is Frontier by Guillaume Sangelon, a French comic author. And it's very cozy, life on a space station, very detail heavy, a lot of greeble in the artwork. As you can see, it's extremely detailed, but the art is also very cute, which I really like. And you get just these amazing vistas and various landscape shots where they're basically just doing a lot of traveling on different planets. And that's something that I've been getting really into lately, is like the soft sci-fi of going around to different planets and traveling on space stations and kind of having it feel like a travelogue. Scavenger's Reign, the TV show on Netflix, achieves a similar effect. but I really highly recommend Frontier, especially if you're a huge sci-fi fan. Lunar Boy was another one that I read recently by Jess and Sin Weibo. They, oh my gosh, they knocked it out of the park. Talk about powerful debuts. Like Lunar Boy is an amazing heartfelt story about finding yourself and finding belonging with an identity that is at odds with the environment around you. And is also kind of a nice little sci-fi. Oh, here she is. Kind of a cozy, softer sci-fi. But also, gosh, and basically anything Ethan Aldridge has ever made, I love. Ethan Aldridge is one of my favorites. Tilly Walden is one of my favorites. Gosh, recently, I'm trying to think. Jen Wong, Ash's Cabin. That just came out a couple weeks ago, and I really liked it. It's kind of similar to The Other Side of the Mountain, if you ever read that in grade school, or Hatchet, where it's kind of like, oh, here's Raven, she's saying hello.
Teacher who teaches Hatchet, I was also very much a fan of Ash's Cabin.
Yes. Yeah, very much like A Boy and His Dog type narrative, like the experiencing the mountain, except it's with a non-binary kid. And it's really cool to see that in more of a modern day lens. So that was one that I really liked. But oh my gosh, I could go on forever about various comics I've read and enjoyed recently. One of my favorite things is to just like put together book lists of different books by genre, especially graphic novels. And so when people are just like, "Do you have any recommendations? Where do I start?" I just like hand them a pile. I'm just like, "Here, start with these 20."
Yeah, we definitely identify with that. That's awesome. We could also spend all day making book lists and talking about so many favorites that you just listed.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for us? You don't have to, but if you do, we can try to answer them.
Sure. So what other books have you guys read as like a book club?
Yeah, so this is our 21st month of our monthly book club. Wow. So we have read many. Let's see, some favorites.
The Princess and the Grilled Cheese.
Yeah, the Princess and the Grilled Cheese sandwich.
Oh my gosh.
Definitely a
so
favorite.
good.
Also, The Deep Dark by Molly Knox Ostertag was a favorite for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of sci-fi, Cosmonites, I think was a favorite
Yes!
for folks. Yeah.
Oh, I love Cosmonites.
Yeah.
I really like the Bad Dreamer story by Nicole Maines as well. A bit of a superhero one, but I thought the art in that one was really cool.
Mm.
And Brooms.
Yeah, Brooms, the beautiful like historical fiction witch, almost like Fast and
Fast and
Furious.
Furious with magic.
With broom racing.
Sins of the Black Flamingo.
Oh yeah, really early. One of our very first ones was Sins of the Black Flamingo. Was that our first? No.
That was our
maybe?
first one.
Was it?
I think it was.
Wild. Yeah, Sins of the Black Flamingo.
Storygraph because I forget.
Which is like
Super.
Miami noir. Yeah, it's like
I
magical.
don't think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's who did that? It wasn't Image. Was it IDW? Dark Horse? I'm blanking on. I think it was. Yeah, it might have been Dark Horse. It was a. It was serial. It was a mini series. It was serialized first and then collected into a trade. But yeah, it follows this thief who steals like magical artifacts kind of from the like Miami gay underground scene. And he dresses in this like very flamboyant black flamingo outfit.
Nice.
And everyone's like ridiculously attractive because why not?
Was sexy.
Yeah, just everyone, they're all just like perfect and chiseled. That was fun. Oh yeah, Grand Slam Romance was fantastic. Sailor Moon gay softball mashup. That's a fantastic graphic novel series.
The light. What is it like?
Like Carries On, yeah, which was North Ranger from Rex, Ogle, and Bree. Indigo. Nice. Focus points. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I should be writing these down.
Yeah, Mimosa from Archie Bongiovanni, which is like a ragtag group of 30-something queers who are just like trying to get their life together and doing a really shitty job.
Amazing.
Yeah, which is like very relatable for a lot of us. Yeah, the Jellyfish from Pow Pow Press. From Boom, yeah.
Also beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Is this group the Lola Boys?
No, that was
Definitely not.
that was in Horror Club, but that is also a very gay book and is fantastic from Carmen Maria Machado.
Did we say Sainted Love?
We didn't, no.
Chromatic Fantasy.
Oh my god. Yeah, so last month our theme was Sextember, so we did all spicy books, and we did, Sainted Love from Steve Orlando, which is like time traveling bathhouse.
Amazing.
Yeah, just like lots of orgies and things. And then, thank you. I know, I was trying to see, but I can only see the superhero shelf, and I was like, none of these are helpful. It's the bottom row.
Chromatic Fantasy.
Oh yeah, Chromatic Fantasy from H.A.
Oh, I gotta read that one.
Oh
That was
man.
really good.
Yeah, weird.
That is also kind of spicy. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Estrella Roja and Messy Root.
It wasn't.
Oh my goodness.
Girl Juice.
This is great.
Girl Juice.
Yeah, Girl Juice.
Benji Nate.
Yeah, Benji Nate. Yeah, we did
Last
Other
one.
Ever Afters from Mel Gilman. That was our actual first one,
That was
right?
the act.
That was the first one.
Which is
You're
just
right, I
a
missed that one,
beautiful
that's why.
queer reimagining of classic fairy tales. And Mel does everything in colored pencil, and so that is just like
I'm a big
An
fan of
actual
Mel
labor.
Gilman's work. I should check that out. What's it called?
it's called Other Ever Afters.
Other Ever Afters. Okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, we've done a lot of just like a wild range of genres and topics and lengths and styles.
That's
It's
awesome.
fun. Yeah.
Sounds like my kind of group.
You're always welcome.
Yeah,
It's true. You are always welcome. It is fun.
You guys are so sweet. Oh my gosh. This is fantastic. I really do appreciate you guys going and reading all of these graphic novels and kind of discussing them, because that's really the best way to appreciate a graphic novel, is to kind of take it to other people and be like, what was your takeaway? How did you interpret this scene? Because there are so many ways to interpret the setting of the panels and the composition and the way, even down to the coloring choices and the lighting choices. There's so much potential there for just like these really cool ways to tell a story. And it's delightful to see that comic-based book clubs are picking up traction. And I just think you guys are doing fantastic work.
Thank you. Yeah, we love it, and we're really lucky to get to talk to creators, and it just helps us appreciate the texts all that much more. So thank you for giving us your time and thoughts, and we're so excited for what might come next.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely be checking out the next one, whatever it may be, and whenever that may be.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully you guys won't have to wait too long. I am in the middle of signing a contract for one that I'm doing just the artwork for and someone else is writing. And I've got another one on submission right now to editors at various major publishers that is also, I'd be doing the artwork, someone else will be doing the writing. It might be a while before I do both the art and the writing for a comic, but I do have a story in the Wish Upon a Star anthology. It's a sci-fi comics anthology that basically is far future sci-fi versions of classic fairy tales. And so I've got a story that I did write and draw It's a retelling of The Little Match Girl in space. So that is coming out in February. The Kickstarter campaign just funded. So that is definitely going to be a thing. But in the meantime, yeah, you're mostly going to be seeing me doing artwork and other people writing. And as I try to get a hold of my schedule for the next year or so, we'll see where things go. But I do have plans. I do have ideas for like shorter comics and smaller stories. So yeah, follow me on social media. That is where I yell about things.
Yeah, and if your plans bring you anywhere near Baltimore, you are always invited, and we would love to have you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I will work on that. I'm only just beginning to incorporate like traveling out to conventions. I traveled out to C2E2 for the first time this year. And until then, I had only done cons out west. So I'm excited to be able to expand and do more East Coast stuff. Because I understand you guys have like what's the con that's over in the Baltimore area?
There's
right?
Baltimore Comic-Con, which is in Baltimore, and then we, as a shop, host a graphic novel festival.
Fun.
Yeah, so... And then there's Small Press Expo is in Bethesda, which is not
Small
too
Press
far.
Expo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. I would love to get out to Small Press Expo one day. Maybe when I have a few more smaller short form, because that is definitely on my to-do list for next year, is to do shorter stories like 10, 15, 20 pagers and just kind of have them in like the little zine style so that I can sell those at cons and stuff. But yeah, I would love to. If I ever end up at Small Press Expo, I'm looking you guys up and I will be there.
Yeah, we love we get to catch a lot of folks coming or going for Small Press Expo, so we would love to have you anytime.
Oh, thank you guys. You're so sweet.
Thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate you and your time.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been delightful.
Before we hang up, I just wanted to say, as an RPG fan and a cat fan, I would highly recommend trying out the audiobook of Dungeon Crawler Carl. That's all.
Oh,
It's
nice.
really good and really funny.
Dungeon Crawler.
Carl. Carl, like Carl, the name. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of that. I'll
Cat
check
fan,
it out.
you might enjoy it. It's very funny.
I love that. I mean, I love Dungeon Critters. That is a delightful graphic novel.
A great cat-based RPG called Cat Campaign. That's also really cute. Yeah.
I love
Highly
that.
recommend. From
Yeah,
Grace
anything
Berry.
with cats, I'm totally down for. Like, both of the cats in Ghost Keeper were based on real cats. My mom has a Maine Coon mix named Clove, and she's 20 years old. We don't know how that happened. And she was the inspiration for Muffin. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. That's sweet.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys coming out.
Yeah. Hopefully you have a happy Halloween.
Yes. Happy Halloween to all of you as well.
Thank you.
Bye.